Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today we have an interesting session for you with Tyler Hobbs, who is the creator of Fidenza. Hi, Tyler. Welcome to
Hi, Omoju.
Web3 Community Call. And also, I'm going to have a co-host today. My co-host is Tony Jaramillo, who is a staff designer at GitHub. Welcome, Tony. Welcome, Tyler.
Hi.
Let's
Thank you so much for having me.
into it.
Yes.
This is a very interesting conversation. Full disclosure, I bought my first NFT 3 or 4 weeks ago. I've been looking at them for quite a while, and I never really pulled the plug. But I finally bought the first one, and let's just say I need to have a budget because it connected to something so deep in me. I was like, okay, this is a problem. I'm going to keep buying art every day, and I can't. This is no longer sustainable. Somebody needs to come and put me into control. So I don't know what it is about human psychology, but NFTs definitely connected with something deeper than just buying art. It connected to something deeper. Can you talk a little bit about what you think that is? What you think is going on? What is it about us and looking at pictures online that has a lot of something deeper?
Yeah, I mean, first I'll just say I'm totally in the same boat as you. Like, even just as a collector, actually, I've loved collecting artwork for a long time, and NFTs have definitely hooked me as a collector as well. It's so easy to get artwork from all these artists that I've enjoyed, watching their output for years, and finally I can just see all the work they're putting out there, and it's really easy for me to pick it up and collect it. And psychologically, it is interesting. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there, but I agree with you. It just feels so easy to get kind of directly connected to the community, to the creator. It's so easy to see all of this work that's out there, and I think there's just really a big cultural shift where we're starting to appreciate this work, and for a lot of digital artists, this is the first time in their life that they've had this kind of attention and opportunity. And I think it's the first time that a lot of people have been seriously interested in collecting digital work as well. And just because it's always been kind of weird in the past to think about collecting digital work. And so now that it's kind of legitimized in some way, people feel a lot more comfortable collecting digital work. They don't feel like they're just, throwing their money away. And so I think that's opened up a whole new opportunity for us to appreciate digital artists from a collector's perspective.
Tony, do you have anything to say as the designer who actually does designs online in a digital format where it's consumed? How do you see NFTs?
Yeah. I have so many questions for Tyler on this. How do I see NFTs? I feel the draw as well for NFTs, and I see why people are so interested in them, myself included. And the thing that I feel like is new for it, and Tyler, I'd love to get your take on this, is there is beautiful art out there, which is, not something that's new, but you have this level of exclusivity that you get for being plugged into it. And I feel like there's a real community built around NFTs in that you have a connection with the artist. And what I mean by that is when I see people buying NFTs right now, you get plugged in and a link to the artist where, in the past, if you sold a print on your website, Tyler, do you have a connection with them? Does that communication keep going after the purchase or the transaction? Because now it feels a bit different.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. There's definitely communities coalescing around different artists. Sometimes the particular platform, but individual artists have been able to build a community really well. It's been interesting. There's so much activity on Twitter and on Discord. Almost all of the really successful NFT artists you can really easily access through either Twitter or Discord or both. And so it's great there's like a level of direct communication that wasn't there before either. It's awesome to be able to pop in and ask the artist, how they came up with that design, or other artists that they enjoy seeing, or seeing the other collectors talk about the work and what they appreciate about the work. And there's a lot of insight to be gained from that. And it's also kind of a place to to share the work that you've collected with other people that you know are going to appreciate it, which is a great feeling as well. Because yeah, I mean, like in the past, if you enjoyed a generative artist, there's almost nobody physically around you that's going to know what generative art even is, right? But you go online to these communities, and there might be hundreds of people there that love it for the exact same reason as you. So I think that community aspect of it really is a pretty crucial part, and I think that's awesome. I think I couldn't be happier about that being an important part of this art world.
So talking about communities, one of the things that I find the most fascinating about Web3 especially is the proliferation of creator communities. From the Bored Ape Yacht Club to the CryptoPunks. Are you going to create a social token and maybe a DAO so you can actually put all your community in one place and coordinate and bring all the Tyler Hobbs fans together?
Yeah, that's a great question. There have been other artists in the space that have done that and have focused a lot on the community and doing things like essentially trying to build these tokens that create access to the community. And I do think it's really interesting. Personally, I'm pretty happy with the way that my community has already coalesced, and I do really want to try to stay focused on the artwork as much as I can. My time is already unfortunately really stretched, and any time that I spend thinking about DAOs and tokens is essentially going to take directly away from my ability to create new artwork. And so just in terms of prioritization, I'm making the choice to focus more on artwork, but I am really excited to see how some of these other artists are breaking ground in that way, and I won't rule out doing something like that in the future, especially as I start to get maybe more help. But yeah, it's interesting that there's so much more kind of power in the hands of the artist now to do things like that.
And it can actually be one of the ways you get help. So you can just have people do stuff and then you can focus on the art. But go ahead, Tony.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to step on your toes there. Yeah, in kind of building on what you were saying, I feel like there's a real element of taking it beyond the art and doing something with social good. And I've noticed that certain groups of NFTs have projects and roadmaps that do things that are beyond just selling art. They're making animations, they're making comic books. You know, some of them are even building dog parks by buying NFTs, and they're taking that money. They're building dog parks, I think, in Berkeley. So there's this real element of like taking this financial element and kind of funneling the money to doing something that's social good beyond, people just buying Lamborghinis and trying to make money like that. I think the focusing on the social good is the thing that's really interesting and optimistic and exciting to me. So I'm really curious to see how that space evolves in the future.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, some of these groups are bleeding out into the physical world, and like you said, doing some really interesting projects. Which I think is fantastic. And yeah, anytime that we can focus our energy on something for charity or for greater social good, like what better cause can there be than that? So I love any time community or artists really put some effort into that side of things.
Yeah.
Cool. Can you, taking a step back, we've been talking about generative art. Can we actually just talk about what is your process of creating generative art? And maybe before we even get to that, what exactly is generative art?
Okay, yeah, great question. So in general, I would define generative art as art that is created through a process where the artist is essentially designing a process and then allowing it to execute with some amount of whatever happens, and so that the end result is not totally predictable. Now, that doesn't have to be done through computer programming. There's ways that you can do that with physical processes, or you can do things like rolling dice in order to guide the creation of your artwork. But it does happen to be really convenient to do it through computer programming, and so generative art these days really typically refers to what I would maybe also call algorithmic artwork, which means you're designing an algorithm that generates artwork, and that's the way that I create my work as well. Basically, I sit down and I kind of write a program from scratch that generates images as its output. I don't typically have any sort of input to the program, so I'm not doing like data visualization or photo processing or anything like that. It's kind of starting from a blank canvas and drawing, curves and shapes and lines to construct an image, typically an abstract one. And there's a lot of randomness in the program. So each output from the program will be different. And that means that instead of writing a program that's, focused on one image, I'm really trying to create a whole system or process, kind of a loose set of guidelines for what I think it would be interesting to see the program output. And then it's kind of in the hands of the gods of randomness in terms of what ultimately comes out. But I'm trying to give it like a gentle push in the right direction. So that's how I would briefly describe how I create my generative artwork.
I noticed that, or I've heard you talk about some of your processes in the past, and sometimes you have a hand input that then goes to the algorithm and then has an output on the other side of it. You specifically, I think you were mentioning using a Wacom, displays you can draw on. I don't know if that's what's on your desk, but are you still employing this technique? It's really intriguing to me because it's a real mix between human and machine, and like, where is the line, right? And that's a really interesting space to live for art. And so I'm curious to know, are you still using that process, or have you moved a lot more into code or the other way?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. I've always, I always had a background in more traditional artwork. Specifically, I really enjoyed figure drawing. I spent a lot of time training in that, and it's something I do really enjoy doing. And so I love finding opportunities to mix the hand-drawn elements and the generative elements. And I am really fascinated about that intersection of kind of the computer aesthetic and the handmade aesthetic, and how they're different and how they can relate. And so a lot of my work does focus on that area, but specifically, I like to create work, like you mentioned, that brings in hand-drawn elements. And I have several techniques that I use for that, but one of them is to take a Wacom tablet, which is essentially just like a giant iPad, and to draw on it in a way that I can capture the lines that I've drawn as vector data, and then they're easy to use as sort of input to my generative algorithms. So they'll tend to be kind of a starting point that then gets processed by the algorithm. So, for example, I've done works where I'm drawing figures, right, like outlines of figures, and then maybe the algorithm takes that figure and turns it into colorful shapes in some way, right? I've been doing that kind of work for years, and I'm still doing it. I did probably one of my most complex works in that technique earlier this year. It's not public yet, unfortunately, but I'm still continuing to do it, and I think there's a huge potential there because it helps to unlock certain types of works that you just couldn't create without that hand-drawn element. Like, if you want to have a portrait in the work, right, and you don't want to be working with a photograph, it's almost impossible to kind of like program a portrait in. Like, you can do it, but it's really tedious and it kind of sucks the joy out of it. And it's just really nice to be able to draw a portrait and then have that be part of the work. And that's something that's not easily accessible through programming alone. And so that's why I think there's so much power in that hybrid approach. And that's why I definitely plan to continue doing it.
This reminds me. Oh, go ahead, Tony.
No, please.
This reminds me of like, so just looking at your work and some of the generative algorithms and generative art, it just reminds me a lot of the work that we do in computer science. So that the portrait one you're talking about is that CS plus X for all X is the combination of the two, and great things emerge from that. Taking a step back into the process of, for example, creating a Fidenza, which is it's not like you make this program, you have an idea of the design space of the program, and when a user goes to mint Fidenza, that's when you find out exactly
Right.
what that will be. So
Right.
the question I have is, it sounds to me very, very similar to what we do in machine learning, where we have this space of possibilities and we're looking to fit a curve and we're trying to optimize for this curve. But
Yeah.
we have evaluation metrics. We have something like area under the curve that we can write an algorithm and run the evaluation metric against. So we have an idea
Right.
of the goodness of fit.
Right.
In your work, how? Because you can't say, I've created this algorithm, you're going to put
Right.
it up there, and then people start minting. Because of the randomness, you're not quite certain what the boundaries of the goodness of fit
No.
is.
No.
How do you do your own evaluation before you let the thing out in the wild?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. That is certainly a huge aspect of the challenge at the heart of creating this type of generative work, which there's two parts to that problem, right? You mentioned you have this big output space, and simply just creating that big output space in the first place can be challenging. It's not always easy to create an algorithm that creates a large potential output space. But then the bigger you create that space, it's almost like the smaller percentage of that space is actually high quality, right? And so it becomes much harder to restrict the program's output to, as you mentioned, kind of this narrow curve within that high dimensional space. In simpler words, the more variability you introduce in the output, the harder it is to guarantee a minimum basic quality for every output. And so, yeah, how do you do that as an artist? It would be nice if I had some kind of like a grading system, right? Or if I was like taking a machine learning approach. I'm sure that there are generative artists that are doing that, and I'm sure that technique will work really well. Right now, instead, it's much more basic for me. It's kind of more heuristics, right? So my process when developing the algorithm is I'm constantly generating outputs, and I'm constantly kind of shifting around in that high dimensional space, looking at the different areas and trying to see if there are weaknesses in those combinations. And if there are weaknesses, then I either try to structure the algorithm so that I avoid those particular areas, those combination of features, or perhaps I figure out a way that I can add something to it or do it a little bit different so that it looks better under those circumstances. So it's kind of like a elaborate QA process. I'm generating hundreds of outputs and just looking for weak points in the algorithm, and then figuring out how I can tune the algorithm to eliminate or improve those weak points. And of course, ultimately, there's going to be a lot of variation in quality still. Anytime you take your hands off the reins a little bit, you give that freedom to the algorithm, you're giving space for emergence to happen, which is a really important property of generative artwork. Emergence is what emergence means. Something comes out that you don't expect, right? It's like these simple rules somehow combine to create something wildly different from what you could have anticipated. And the official Fidenza output is full of these emergent results that I was really surprised by and really pleasantly surprised by. But if I had like locked down the algorithm too much, those results never would have happened. And so, as the generative artist, you're playing this really careful role with the tension there between giving the algorithm the freedom to create these emergent results and still trying to make sure that it's not outputting a bunch of crap. Like that's just that's the hard part. It's really hard. It's not easy.
And specifically Art Blocks is the platform that you use for this, right? For Fidenza specifically, right?
That's correct.
Which is such an intriguing platform. This is a whole way of minting art that feels new to me. Is this a new style of I mean, generative art isn't so much new, but the way that the way things are getting minted, is this something that's new or something that's been around for a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, just to explain a little bit of the history of generative art, it has been around since the 1960s,
Mhm.
back to very early computers. There was a lot of people coming from engineering and military backgrounds, and it's continued throughout the decades, but it's never been super popular, and it's always gotten kind of a tough rap from art critics. But so it's nice to see that it's kind of having its moment in the sun right now. But in terms of art blocks, and doing something new, I do think that art blocks has made a significant change in terms of the opportunity for generative artists and also kind of the artistic demands for creating these types of algorithms. So I'll just quickly explain how art blocks works. They It's based on the Ethereum blockchain, and they have written a smart contract that allows the generative artist to upload their script itself to the blockchain and then to mint a specific number of NFTs from that script directly. And so whenever the collector goes onto the site and minting is open, when they hit the buy button, they don't know what they're going to get. Essentially, when they hit buy, then it triggers that script, generates an image, and mints a new NFT that then goes directly to the collector. So there's no opportunity for the artist or for art blocks or for the collector to know in advance what's going to come out. So there's no opportunity for curation or for cherry picking, right? Like if a bad output comes out, like that's what the collector is going to get. Or if it's a great output, that's what the collector is going to get. So this sort of really direct feature of like output from the script goes directly into the hands of the consumer or the collector. No filter in between, not even knowing what it's going to be. Like that's a really new aspect. But just the whole large output set size is also fairly new. So, with art blocks, a lot of these collections are at least a few hundred outputs in the collection. Like Fidenza was 999, and 1,000 is a pretty typical set size. And that's a pretty big departure on its own from how generative artists have been working. Like to take my own work in the past, I would develop an algorithm and I would make some prints from that algorithm available for sale. And that might have been 8 or 10 or 16. I think the most I did from any one algorithm was 32. And so we're talking about, going up 10 or 100x in terms of how many outputs from the algorithm are going into the hands of collectors. And so that kind of forces the artist to make a much more robust and versatile algorithm, because you don't want 1,000 images that start to get repetitive, right? Like you want there to be a lot of new interesting things coming up whenever you're scrolling through those results. And so, yeah, you have to spend a lot more time crafting these algorithms that are capable of generating these really large output set sizes. And so I think it's that combination of those two things, that large output set size, and also the fact that it goes directly to the consumer, to the collector, with no curation or filter. Those two things are really changing the game and kind of helping to push artists in a really interesting new direction, I think. Of course, nothing is totally new under the sun. There's some amount of precedent for all of this, but it really does feel like a giant shift in terms of what's happening to me.
Yeah, it's very cool to see. And then I'm curious. So you said that your code is it's inputted on the blockchain, on the Ethereum blockchain, right? Your particular algorithm. I'm curious about security about this, because aren't blockchains transparent in a sense? And is your code visible to everyone? And if so, is this concerning for artists out there? Security, copyright issues, all of those.
Yeah, so the code is on the blockchain. Like I mentioned, that's part of how it works. And so people can go and pull down the code for the Fidenza algorithm. I do still own that code, right? I still I don't have a permissive license on it. I still own full copyright on it. So legally, people aren't entitled to use it for their own purposes. But of course, people are going to try and do that anyway. And in fact, like this has already started to happen, where people are talking about making fake output or generating new output from the algorithm that I haven't authorized, things like that. I don't know how it's going to play out. I mean, obviously I'm not a fan of that. I think I specifically chose, for there to be 999 outputs from the algorithm and for that to kind of be the start and the end of it. And I'm not interested in continuing to create new work from it. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see in this more decentralized world exactly how all that goes. Like a certain amount of it has to be social self-policing, right? Like these communities, these networks have to make a stand for ethics and for artistic integrity. And I'm hoping that there's a strong ethos of protecting artists' work and not trying to wrongfully exploit it or do things that are against the wishes of the artist. I'm hoping that that kind of behavior is shunned by the crypto community. And so far, I've seen obviously there's a few bad actors out there, but 99% of the people I've seen have been amazingly supportive and want to do the right thing, and it's super encouraging to see. So so far I've loved the response from the community, and I think ultimately everything's going to be just fine. It's just there's a lot of new issues to work out there, so that's one of the more interesting aspects to keep an eye on, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like because there's so much value in this space right now, I feel like someone will fill that space of making sure that things are, that people are getting a stamp of some kind, or, that to make sure things are actually coming from Tyler Hobbs and not someone who took your code and started duplicating.
Yeah. I mean, that part of it actually is already really well handled. So that's like kind of the whole value proposition of the blockchain is you can see exactly who created the NFT, exactly who's owned it before, the whole provenance. And so it's really easy to tell, like, is this a legit Fidenza or not? It's more a question of are people like willing to buy something that's a fake Fidenza, like even though they know it's fake, right? Of course, some people might get duped that are just not super aware of the space, and that's a shame as well. But fortunately, in terms of like telling what's legit and what's not, like that's really easy. That's the whole point of the blockchain. And so I'm not really concerned about people ever knowing if something's a real Fidenza or not. It's more, there's just a whole bunch of other gray area of like how people can reuse the work in ways that, I'm not okay with.
Gotcha.
So one of the things that we were just talking about that, Fidenza, it's on-chain, it's on Ethereum, it's an NFT, the provenance is there. Does it actually matter to you that your work is on the decentralized web, or you just want your work out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't, if I can be honest, I don't think about that aspect of it too much. I like the decentralization aspect for a couple of reasons. One is that it is, censorship resistant, and it's much more open for any artist to come into the space without having to go through this, barrier of, like, in the traditional art world, there's very much like an old boys network, and you have to make all these social connections in order to get your work shown and respected. And so I love that the blockchain and is giving us an opportunity to sidestep those sorts of issues. I love that just for collectors as well, it's so much more accessible. It doesn't matter who you are, you can buy the artwork. Some people might not know that in the traditional art world, when you get into the high end, just because you want to buy a piece and you have enough money to buy a piece of artwork doesn't mean you're allowed to buy it. Like the artists and the brokers and the galleries will be very protective of who they sell their work to. They want it to be in the right hands. And so I love that barrier for collectors is also being torn down. I love that it's a much more equitable playing field. Of course, there's still lots of biases and issues, but it's at least, I think, a big step in the right direction on that front.
So some have said that we're in this crypto renaissance.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a little bit of what you alluded to. Now we are all the Medicis. Anybody with a wallet is part of the Medici clan. And
Yes.
all of us can be patrons of the art.
Yeah.
And it's not just one or two Michelangelos. It's anybody that wants to be Michelangelo can be Michelangelo.
Absolutely.
Do you see this as a moment? Like, oh, it's just a moment in time? Or
Yeah.
do you see this as a movement leading to
Mhm.
something that we can't even fathom?
Oh, I think this is going to be huge. I mean, I think this is the start of something huge for sure. Yeah, I mean, just that that whole, it's really about social acceptance, I think, is the biggest shift. Like, people have, at this point, people have bought into the fact that NFTs are legit. Like, early on, people are saying, "Oh, why are you buying an NFT? You could just right click and save the JPEG, right?" Like, that's a meme at this point. But I think we've kind of collectively, socially decided if you buy the NFT, that has meaning, right? Like, you legitimately own a piece of artwork and you've supported an artist, and that's a meaningful thing. And so I think that social consensus is already strongly there, and I think there's another level of social consensus around. We're kind of collectively deciding that it's a good idea to support all these digital artists, and that the work that they're creating is meaningful and worthwhile, and that we think it's a good idea to support these artists. And it's not just a few super rich patrons that are doing that. It's everyday people with average taste, right? These are not necessarily ivory tower people that want a very specific academic kind of artwork. And so I think it's kind of allowing artists to make their own way in a lot of ways, and it's allowing collectors to make their own way in a lot of ways. And just, it's the first time for digital artists that they've had this kind of financial support. Historically, being a digital artist just means you're broke. Like, there was just no way to make any money from it. And just the fact that that's not the case anymore is huge, because look, I mean, we're all living in like a digital landscape at this point. We spend so many hours in front of our computers. You and I are talking in a digital format right now. It's so important that we have digital artists, and that work is valued just as much as physical work is. And that's really going to help to reshape our digital environments to make them much more enjoyable and humane. And so I think empowering digital artists is going to have a big cultural effect as well. So I think all of those aspects are coming together to make something that's going to be a really big shift. And I can't predict the future, but to me, it feels like the start of something really big.
Yeah, I think you touched on this before, but it's about breaking down barriers for who can collect this art now. And I feel like that's a real big thing about Web3 right now is about democratizing things. And it gives a real sense of optimism for me for what the future can be. Because I mean, you see it with, going around banks, for lack of a better term, or you being your own bank might be a better way to put it. You being your own art collector. There's this real spreading out and democratization. I feel like the walls are coming down for people. So it's super exciting to see all this come into fruition, and we're just on the cusp of it happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and I think a lot of people have noticed that there's almost this like time warp effect with how quickly things are happening. Like, Fidenza came out 3 months ago, and for a lot of people, it feels like it was like 2 years ago, because so much has changed since then. So yeah, the pace of change is incredible, and so it'll be wild to see, even just a couple years from now, what things are like.
Oh yeah, for sure. So yeah, we chatted briefly in April or May because we commissioned you to do a piece for our Bellevue office, right? And I was
Correct.
thinking about this before we talked. I'm wondering how things have changed from you because Fidenza came out in what, June?
Yeah, June 11th.
So Fidenza came out in June. So from when we commissioned you to do this beautiful mural in our Bellevue, Washington office up until now, how have things changed for you? How have the opportunities changed as an artist?
It's been the biggest change you could possibly imagine. Yeah, I mean, earlier this year, yeah, I was primarily making my living selling prints through my website, which I did feel pretty good about. This is something I had worked on and built up over years, and I was starting to be able to earn a comfortable living from that. I was, taking commissions from clients like yourself doing murals, and fortunately, I was able to be at least somewhat selective and do really cool projects like the GitHub Office mural. But yeah, I just have a whole new level of independence and also visibility and credibility, I guess, at this point. Uh, it's happened so fast that it's been like totally mind blowing, and it's hard for me to even accept the reality of it a lot of the time. But essentially, I have now more or less complete artistic freedom. I don't have the need to necessarily take on any projects that I don't want to take on. I constantly have opportunities coming in. I get emails every day about people that are interested in doing, collaborations or commissions or various types of projects. And I'm able to pitch places with my own ideas for projects, and much more likely to be able to make that a reality. So it's been incredibly empowering, and it's just like I couldn't have asked for anything better to happen. It's been absolutely incredible, and it's been that way for a lot of other artists in this area too. It's been fantastic to see how many artists can now are just firmly established and can focus on creating their work. So many artists have been able to quit their day jobs and just focus on the artwork, or to stop worrying about paid commissions, and they can do maybe more exploratory creative work that's a little bit harder to I don't know, pitch a commercial client on, right? So I think this is only going to contribute to a rapid increase in the quality of work that we see coming out of this space.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hear a lot of parallels in that between like GitHub sponsors and what's happening now with the NFT space, where you're directing funds directly to the developer, the creator, the artist, and empowering them to give them freedom to work on the projects that they want to do. And I'm so curious to see when people have that freedom, what they will really create and how they will help progress the whole space.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's those passion projects are the ones that tend to have the most interesting results. So the more we can enable passionate creators, I think we'll definitely reap rewards as a society from doing that.
Yeah. So as technology progresses, I'm curious about, are there tools or technology that you're excited about in the code development world? And I'm thinking, and Omoju, this is totally your topic, so please feel free to jump in here as well. But AI, as these things start to come online, do you feel like this is going to be another tool in your toolbox for how you create, or or is it something different that we're not imagining yet?
Ooh, Omoju,
So
you
I
want to
actually
expand
have
on that?
something with that one.
Yeah.
Reading some of Tyler's essays, prepping for this call, helped me to unlock something. So I'm in the process of designing a garden.
Of designing a what?
A garden, like
Okay.
garden, plants.
Yeah, with plants.
Flowers.
And yeah.
And a garden is kind of like a painting, but
Yeah.
it's in 3D. It's in the real thing. I've been spending my time writing this Excel sheet, all these features, balancing it, and I was like, oh my God, I need a Pareto distribution. This Pareto distribution will solve all these problems. And if I write these algorithms and put in all these features, I can actually generate different versions of what this could look like and pick the best one.
I love it. Yeah.
I was finally able to make the leap from math, statistics, algorithm in the real, like for just doing work.
Yeah.
To now art and nature. And I wanted to ask you, well, how did you make your leap from like mathematics outside of math class into something that is art?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I love the tie-in to gardening as well. I mean, it sounds like you caught the generative bug a little bit. Like you got to the heart of it, right? Like it's cool. Sometimes it's nice to take some of that pressure out of your hands as the artist, as you don't have to, you're okay with like giving you general guidelines and you don't have to worry about the exact specifics sometimes. And yeah, when you introduce that like random element, it'll throw out things that surprise you in a really cool way. Like I can't tell you the number of times that I've seen output where I've seen it and I'm just like blown away. I'm like, wow, that's like such a cool composition, or it's such a cool idea to like, have these things behave in a particular way that I never would have thought of on my own, but just through sheer randomness, these things get suggested to you. And it's, you don't have to stop there either, right? Like you can say like, okay, I'm going to take that randomized aspect, I'm going to solidify that in the program, make it more fixed, and then I'm going to let the randomness take over other parts. So it's a cool like back and forth that you can do as an artist. So I think it's amazing, like thinking about doing generative garden design, and yeah, I mean, I think that approach in general is going to spill over into a lot of areas of design, and I know it already has in some areas like architecture. Okay, so there were a few questions. One was like, how did I make the jump from kind of thinking about math and code into thinking about art? And there's other questions of like what tools are coming down the road, like AI, like maybe how am I going to work with those? How do I see other artists working with those? Okay, I'll start with just talking about my own background first. So I grew up painting and drawing all the time. I like to do other things like skateboarding was absolutely my favorite, and playing music. But I was always painting and drawing, and I was really interested in being an artist after high school. I wanted to go to an art school, but my dad convinced me to study computer science instead for pragmatic reasons, right? Which is not necessarily bad advice. Like on average, that's probably a good choice when you're going to school. So I went and studied computer science, and I had been doing programming, so I was pretty excited about that as well. Studied computer science at UT, and started working at tech startups. Like I was working at a company called DataStax on an open source distributed database called Apache Cassandra. And so, super tied into open source and GitHub and that whole scene. In the background, I continued working on artwork, and even though I really loved my work as an engineer, it was a fantastic job. I kind of decided that I really wanted artwork to be the thing that I focused on long term in my life, and I wanted to try to take it more seriously. And so I kind of renewed my efforts on artwork and started studying it much more intensely and working on artwork every day. And kind of got my traditional art skills into a pretty good place. Like I mentioned earlier, I did a lot of figure drawing, landscapes, things like that. Those were actually starting to get pretty good. I wouldn't say that I was a great artist, but they were at least solid, I felt like. But I knew that I needed to make my work a little bit more personal, a little bit more about me, about my life. And in general, for every artist, I think it's super important to try to involve your life and in as many aspects of it as you can in your artwork. That's really your domain of expertise and interest, and anything you can pull in that's personal is going to make your artwork that much better. So for me, programming played such a big role in my life that I knew it had to be involved in my artwork in some way. And honestly, the way to combine the two was not readily apparent to me. Like I had a bunch of false starts of just totally different approaches. Like I remember at one point I made like a painting that looked kind of like a programming IDE, and so I was like thinking about things from that, right? Which is like it's one approach, but I wasn't super satisfied with that. But then I kind of had the thought of, what if I write a program that generates a painting, What would that look like? And so uh, I kind of started taking that approach, and right away I was really interested in the results. Like I could tell that there was something special there, and that even though I wasn't great at it yet, technically the results were already way more interesting than the paintings that I had been making. And so I decided I was going to focus on that and keep doing that. And that was about 7 years ago, 7.5, I guess. And that's been my main focus since then. And yeah, I've just been really interested in how to blend that uh, kind of that computer aesthetic and that computer programming way of working with my more traditional artistic tastes. Like I still love painting and drawing, and there's something I love about the way those look and feel, and so I'm interested in like seeing how those combine with programming. But um, I'm not super focused on the math and the algorithms, in the sense that I don't care really at all if the algorithm is fancy or sophisticated or uses advanced math. In fact, it's better if it doesn't do those things in my mind, because I want to have very full control and understanding over the algorithm. I don't, um, as an artist, the more you know and understand your tools, the better you're able to wield them. And so I have avoided doing things like using like Navier-Stokes, fluid dynamics equations, because even though they can make some really pretty things, like I could never master those at the same level as I can master, say something like flow fields, right? Which is the basis for Fidenza, which is a much more simple algorithm, but it's because I understand it and can manipulate it so well, it's incredibly powerful as an artistic tool. So I don't think you have to use sophisticated mathematics or algorithms at all to create beautiful artwork. Um, there's no problem if you do, and I'm sure you can reach some really interesting corners of the space if you have those tools in your belt. But I wouldn't be intimidated if you have only kind of a novice level programming skills, but you're interested in creating this kind of work. Yeah, moving forward in the future, like what kind of tools are going to start to be used? I mean, we've already seen machine learning play a really big role in generative art. There's kind of a whole field of generative art that's machine learning based. So there's artists like Mario Klingemann and Robbie Barrett and Helena Sarin. There's many more that I can't pull off the top of my head, but they're doing fantastic generative work with machine learning. And I think as those tools become more accessible and faster to use, less resource intensive, I think we'll see that continue to explode. I think same thing with VR. I think as that becomes more accessible from a consumer standpoint and also from a creator standpoint, I think we'll start to see some really cool work in VR. I'd love to see generative sculpture in a VR environment. That's not something I necessarily have the skills to do, but I'm certain that something amazing could be done there. Yeah, I think I don't know if I'm going to use any of those tools. Like I'm kind of like an old man a little bit in terms of the tools I use. Like I do everything in Vim, and I keep it really basic. I mean, I use kind of a niche programming language. It's called Clojure, which is a Lisp dialect that runs on the JVM, and it's an awesome language. But other than that, there's nothing too fancy about the tech stack that I use. And as long as I'm able to continue making work that I feel is fresh and interesting, I'm not going out and looking for new technology to use necessarily.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's interesting that you have your tools and mastering them. I think that's something that resonates a lot with the art community. Knowing your tool, knowing how to wield it, like you're saying, is super important. So, I'm curious. So we commissioned you because we wanted to highlight this kind of this convergence of code and art on GitHub, right? This real creator community that was out there.
Yeah.
Collaboration is an enormous part of code development, as I'm sure you know. I'm curious, are you seeing a lot of collaboration between artists, and are you collaborating with other artists? Do you lean on other people's code to help build some of the tools that you use?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think that artwork can be a little more challenging for collaboration because you start to run into kind of design by committee issues a little bit, and unless you have really aligned artistic visions, it can be hard to make everything match up. So much of artistic creation is not pre-planned. It's kind of intuitive, in the moment decisions. Even for something like my work where it's programmed, like I'm not pre-planning it. Like I don't even know what the finished product is going to look like when I'm started. I have a rough idea of a starting point, and then I try something and I decide if it looks good or not, and I try something new, and I continue and I iterate, just making small decisions over and over again, and I kind of gradually build up the algorithm. And so if I'm collaborating with somebody else, then we would have to kind of, already have a vision for maybe where we're heading, which would already be a little bit unnatural for me. And then, yeah, all of those little decisions, like it's easy for there to be friction, and it doesn't always work quite as smoothly. So I have seen some other artists that are able to do that and work really well collaboratively. So far, I haven't been super stoked about doing that. It's been a little bit of an awkward fit for me in my experience. But I will say that one of the most important ways that artists are working together is through code sharing. So these are, tooling, infrastructure, basic algorithms in order to create this kind of artwork. And that goes a really long way, especially towards helping somebody get started who's new to the space. So that kind of sharing is really awesome. I think also sharing ideas. This is one of the reasons why I like to write the essays on my site, is to explain some of these concepts and my approach to making artwork, because I think, I don't think I'm the best artist or whatever necessarily, but I think I have a certain amount of value that I can at least expose a new viewpoint to some artists, and hopefully open up some ideas for them, or help to inspire them. And I do hear from people who email me all the time saying that they read the essays or they saw one of my talks, and now they're making generative art for the first time. And so it's really beautiful to hear those kinds of stories, and to see how that kind of sharing can make such a big difference in people's lives. And so I love seeing that side of this community, how the artists are really willing to share and teach others.
Stepping away from digital art for a second, NFTs are like a ownership protocol over digital and physical assets.
Yes.
And they found like they're a super application in digital art. That's one of the first things that we're really seeing, from CryptoKitties to Fidenza. My question is, when are we going to go the other route and actually start tokenizing physical assets?
Yeah.
When are we going to cross into meat space and bring NFTs to physical assets and put this cryptographic ownership on chain? Like, why should my driver's license still be plastic?
Right.
I can lose that thing. Why should the title of a car be a physical piece of paper that you have and you never remember where it is, and then the day they ask you for it, you have a panic attack?
Yeah.
When are you going to cross over?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'm an artist, so like I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but I would be really surprised if we don't start seeing that crossover happen. There's so much advantage to the transparency and that provenance. Just like you mentioned with things like, I don't know, the title to your car, or ownership of a house or a piece of property, right? Like being able to see, here's who owned it, here's when they bought it, here's how much they bought it for, here's the same information for every other property in your neighborhood, so you can make a totally transparent decision about the valuation of the home, right? Like those just make for such healthier marketplaces. I think most people agree that free markets are most efficient whenever this kind of information is freely available. And so I would love to see that kind of transparency, especially for these more valuable assets like cars and homes, where the extra transaction cost is worth it, basically. Like, yeah, if it costs you $100 in gas fees to buy a house using Ethereum, like, you don't care, right? So I don't know how it's going to break over into the physical space. I don't know who's going to be willing to be on the cutting edge of that, but I feel like it's going to unlock so much value that it's only a matter of time before people do it. I think, yeah, you just need that buildup of social trust and the building of new social norms, right? Like, once people have the expectation that your house has a NFT associated with it, then that's the tipping point, and everybody's going to want to have it, right? So, yeah, that'll be really cool to see that unfold over time.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Like, can you just imagine going on OpenSea and buying your house or
Yes.
like an Ethereum transaction? That'd be so cool.
One of the things I would love to do is to be able to tokenize my house. Think about it. We're in the Bay Area. You have a house. All the accrual of the growth of this house, it accrues to you. What if you could tokenize it and make it into fractional things so that everybody can benefit, not just you? So when you sell it, the upside can be shared with multiple people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, you could share it with your family or your roommates, or there's so many. Maybe you could have multifamily co-ownership of like, a duplex or a quadplex or apartment, whatever. Like, yeah, there's so many interesting applications. Another thing that came to mind is kind of a transitional thing is there's like a metaverse thing called crypto voxels that's like, it kind of looks like Minecraft, right? It's like a really basic environment, but you can purchase plots of lands in crypto voxels. And that's all controlled with Ethereum transactions. So there's already kind of like metaverse precedent for this. And so I think it'll start to, I don't think it's too unnatural for it to make the jump to physical goods.
Plus, so we're coming down on the hour. We've got 3 more minutes. I'm going to give the last question to you, Tony. Take us out.
Oh, last question. I have a serious question and then a semi-serious question, so I'll try to squeeze both of them in. So you touched on the metaverse. I'm curious, the application for you in terms of, I mean, we see voxels and things like that happening in the metaverse. How do you plan on participating in this space, if at all?
I don't have any plans yet. It's not, yeah, I'm going to have to wait and see a little bit, see how it develops and see kind of where the community goes with that. No solid plans yet, but I'm keeping an eye on it.
So are opportunities like licensing, like could you do a mural inside the metaverse that would be in, the metaverse GitHub building for example?
Yeah, somebody's actually already tried to ask me if they could commission a mural inside the metaverse. So yeah, that's already a thing. I said no because I don't have time to, unfortunately, right now. But that's going to start happening for sure.
It's cool. It's a very fun thing to watch. And then my last question is, Omoju and I know a couple people inside the company. Any features that you would like us to try to make happen for GitHub? Anything that any tools we can help provide?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, one thing might be kind of cool just off the top of my head is like live scripts previews. I'm sure there's like some security sandbox issues with that, but things like you write a generative art script, it'd be really cool to be able to just do a quick live preview of it in the interface. I don't know, just an idea.
I think we could probably figure out a way to do that with code spaces.
Yeah,
that is something. So it's like a code tour, and then you see what the output is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, this brings us to the end of this conversation with Tyler Hobbs and Tony Jaramillo. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will be back at the same time in 2 weeks with another interesting builder of the technologies in Web3. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.